Okay, so our next speaker is Hugues Bersini. So he's a professor at ULB and also co-director of the Iridia laboratory, the AI laboratory of ULB. He obtained his master's degree and PhD degree at ULB, and currently he teaches AI and object-oriented technologies, both for academics and for enterprises. He has on top of that written 14 books on basic computer sciences, and in a nutshell, his main research interests include AI, computer science, and their intersections with biology, chemistry, and complex systems. So now I will give him the floor for his talk named Smart Cities, Algocracy, and FARI.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I'm pretty happy to follow up on Gianluca's because I think that none of the public administration will ever use what Gianluca is doing, and I'm going to try to convince you of that problem in Brussels. So I think growing old, you do less and less exact science and more political science. So I'm more inclined to do some talk on my experience on trying to interact with politicians in this very complex country and complex city, which is Brussels. And yeah, that's right. The title is Algocracy, FARI and Smart Cities. As you see, I'm also using a buzzword here, Algocracy, which is less perhaps popular than Smart City, but I'll try to justify, I wrote a book and I will summarize this book in 1 or 2 slides telling you what I believe is Algocracy. And then I try to explain what I've always intend to do with an institute which has been created 5-6 years ago now, which is called FARI. I don't know if you who never heard about the FARI Institute in Brussels. A few of you. So okay, good. Okay, and so most of you knows about the FARI. So I don't have to spend too much time about FARI, but I will anyway tell you some experience I have with trying to indeed supply AI and ICT help for public administration in Brussels and the many failures I had to get through. And so first Algocracy and. Well, basically, the idea of Algocracy is, I got the same problem than the yeah, I have one too. Yeah, let's see that because it's also okay. Let's see. I hope I won't have the same problem that my previous speaker. So the idea of Algocracy is that we're being invaded by algorithms. So most of our daily life is being, we're subject of, a lot of algorithms. And this is the idea of Algocracy. Our life are being ruled by algorithms. So knowing that is just a fact. You spend time, as one of the previous speakers said, we spend time in front of our screen and, adopting some decisions which are being, provided by algorithm, like, coming here by using Waze or, selecting the next movie by using, I don't know, any kind of recommendation software and, selecting your next partner for, for next night by using an algorithms. So and there's two I would say two type of algorithms. This is the kind of thing I described in the Algocracy book. There's some algorithm that just let's look at that. Okay, that just recommend. So you could decide not to use them. You could decide to quit your smartphone, or I've never used, for instance, Tinder. I'm too old for that, but I'm using Waze, I'm using some recommendation engine. My wife is using a lot Vinted, and so this is algorithm that that just recommend, that guide. The world is complex, and you need some algorithm to help you to face this world and to try to find like ways. Like Gianluca was presenting, you should need a lot of algorithmic help in order to circulate in Brussels more and more. By the way. And this is, a first family of algorithms that are not the most worried about it. There's another family of algorithms which also rule our life, but are much more, constraintful. This is algorithm that decide for us, and there's no way to escape. You have to follow the decision taken by algorithms, and so this is taking more and more room in our life. So, for example, you have a Parcoursup in France. We have a décret inscription in Brussels, so in the French part of the country, or even the Flemish part of the country has a kind of algorithm which will decide which school your kids can go in. Or in France, you know, you have to, Parcoursup is becoming a nightmare for most of the French students because this is the algorithm that will decide about, you know, which a university or which academy they can follow. Tax on Web is another, you know, forceful algorithm where you have to go in to pay your taxes, and I can go on and on most more algorithms that more and more rule our life. And if I needed to give you a last example of, you know, one country which has really become a strong algocracy, you might recognize this man, and he used a lot of algorithms in order to decide who's going to stay in job or who needs to leave. And it's incredible to see the power of AI, data science, and algorithm to, you know, and it's a nightmare, you know, what's happening there. But just to give you an example that the power of technocracy, the power of oligarchy, the power of algorithms to rule our life is really well illustrated by people like Elon Musk. We had another very fascinating experience of this, you know, algorithm decided to rule our life during the COVID crisis. It's also another, you know, nightmare we've all been through. But you need to remember the number of software, the number of apps that we needed to download in order to get into a restaurant. Just to get into a restaurant, we had to show, you remember that? We had to show a QR code. You know, I was part of the Corona Alert things because it was one of my colleagues who developed Corona Alert. It's been a complete failure for reasons that I'm going to explain to you. But you know, we need an application in order to take an appointment for testing. We need an application in order to take an appointment for vaccination. So you had a huge bench of, that was not only the case in Belgium, you know, in all of the countries, in all of the world, you realize that we were subjected to a lot of algorithms in order to face COVID. So algorithms ruling our life. So for instance, Parcoursup in décret inscription is the same thing. It's basically a very simple algorithm called the stable marriage algorithms. The more technical name of this algorithm is Gale Shapley, where you need to match two categories of agents. You know, it's very well explained when you think about the stable marriage. There's men which have a certain order of preference for women, and you have women having a certain order of preference of men. And then you try to find the best match. One of the big problems that you have in Parcoursup that I've long explained, a lot of rectors of academy in France didn't even realize that, is that when all the students have the same preference for all the university and all the university have the same preference for all students, then the best solution is to take the first, put them together, the second put them together, the third put them together. So the most quoted student get to the most celebrated university. And this raises a lot of inequality. So algorithm has a lot of impact in our daily life. You can, you know, most of the students in France know if they're not getting out of the best lycée, they don't even dream of getting to Polytech or Sorbonne, etc. That was not the case before because no algorithm is deciding for them which university they have to go and they can register to. So one of the proposals that I had in mind even before the FARI existence was the idea that when you have an algorithm that is so impactful on our daily life, I think the best way to accept this algorithm, and this is where I'm getting into you know, political science, is to modify the way this algorithm is being developed. And I guess that among the developers of this algorithm, you should obviously integrate a lot of expertise. You know, people that are, for instance, for COVID, you should have, you know, I mean, epidemiologists or, you know, medical experts. And for getting to Parcoursup, you need to have, you know, people that know the school, know the university. The students should be, you know, I guess the students should be also a part of the algorithmic decision. And you need, you know, I'm trying to popularize that, but I had a lot of time to make this idea going through, even if Brussels often have been told that it is a kind of participatory democracy city. I don't give a word of that, you know, I'm sure it's not, because there's no real experience of, you know, citizen participation in Brussels that have really driven to anything interesting. But I do believe that this is an ISD, and it's even a more stronger idea where, come up. Yeah, and I guess that this should be the case for algorithms, because algorithms changing everything. You know, algorithm is another power. It's not the legislative power, it's another form of executive power. An algorithm is an executive power which is much more effective than a human power, because you cannot escape algorithm. You know, you have to follow what the algorithm decides for you. So it's a real different version of the executive power. And because you have a different version of the executive power, if you do political science, I'm pretty sure that you need a different version of the legislative power. You know, the one deciding about which kind of algorithm will, you know, submit our life under. You know. So I guess that we need different kind of developers, and citizens should be involved in that. It's a kind of what I usually call GitHub social coding. You know, GitHub is a fantastic platform for computer scientists. Hope it comes back. And but it should involve, I don't know how, it's just a proposal, I don't know exactly how, but it should also involve, you know, the subject that are under the control of those algorithms. They should be part of a GitHub development. A little bit like computer scientists, they all work on GitHub. I guess citizens should be part of this development. So this is what I tried to propose but failed many years ago for a different problem, like access to school. In the French part of the region, I have tried to communicate with many ministers of education in order to convince them that we could develop the décret inscription in a better way just by involving the citizens. Never succeed to make this idea, you know, successful, but I've tried, and I'm not giving up. I'm still think that it might be a good idea. For COVID, I will tell you about some experience I had. Collective mobility, we heard a talk by Gianluca, and we are in my lab also working on some mobility solution. Julien is here, and he's working on car sharing, and I'll show you some experience I had with Brussels mobility. That, to some extent, explain how pessimistic I am about the possibility for Brussels organism and public administration to adopt some high-level technical solutions. And we're also working on energy community. You mentioned energy community. In fact, you mentioned 3 of them. And I'm still working on that. And again, this is very complicated because it's not the public administration in this case, but also the energy actors like Sibelga. As you may know, in Innoveris, they're not very open to collaborate, and it's complicated to push. So just to tell you that the City God project, the one that what the idea was to involve citizens in the coding of those different applications, was accepted by the Brussels Parliament. They wanted to defend it. But is never been able to, for political reasons, to move on. So FARI is a little bit. FARI has been created. I think Carl told me that he was in line. So Carl is actually the administrative director of FARI. FARI was created before COVID 6-7 years ago, and it was created in Montreal during a royal visit. And you can do a lot of things during a royal visit because Brussels was in Montreal, and as you know, Montreal is a little bit like La Mecque of AI these days, because Joshua Benjo, if you know a little bit of AI, you realize how important Montreal has become in the planet of AI. Montreal is one of the most important cities today in AI. But although it is a really key city in AI, we realize that there is no impact of what Joshua Benjo or what the Montreal, the researcher of Mila, which is the institute which has been created by. There was an institute where we were invited, the royal family, and we were all in this institute, and we realized that Mila, as good as it could be, with fantastic researchers, they didn't have any impact on any problem in Montreal, neither the mobility, neither the energy transition, neither the public health, neither the access, nor the access to school. So you had extraordinary researchers there, and you had a lot of problem in Montreal, and there was a huge gap among that. And so because we were really, impressed by what was happening in Montreal, we decided in Montreal to create another kind of institute. And Caroline is, as I realize, Caroline is, one of the key actors here in the creation of BrIAS. Caroline was a fantastic woman with a lot of incredible, initiative, and we were both in Montreal at that time, and we decided to create another kind of institute, one institute whose aim would be to close the gap, to make AI research have a real impact on Brussels citizens. So this is why, this was a dream, 7 years ago, that we could do a kind of algocracy, but beneficial for Brussels, and Brussels could be a real key city, the first city to try something like that, because there is a lot of AI institute, a lot of AI research institute, even in Brussels. You know, there's beautiful AI institute in VUB, in ULB, in UCL, in KUL. But this idea to try to have our development finally implemented to change the life of Brussels citizens was something new, you know, and I didn't realize how difficult that would be. But, you know, that was the dream, and Caroline and myself, we share that dream, and then we created FARI. And so FARI now is a very big thing. It's at Central Station. But for those of you who knows it, you certainly have seen it. Is being administrated by Carl, Hans, and Karen de Boers. I'm still part of the, to some extent, the academic committee. You know, these days you have Tom Lennart, and Emmanuel is also involved in FARI. And so the idea is to do my dream, to realize it, you know, to concretize it. And for instance, trying to develop interesting AI, which is a acceptable AI, humanity AI, whatever, you know, trust AI, responsible AI, you can call it whatever you want, for health, for energy, for mobility, etc., etc. So just to give you an example, we had COVID. And during COVID, you know, I realized, you know, as Gianluca was saying, you know, mobility is very complex, but public health is another complex nightmare. And as I said, I was really, you know, wanted to play my part, trying to help people to manage this crisis. And in Brussels, you may remember that was COCOM. They were in charge of, you know, managing the crisis of COVID. And, you know, I could tell you many stories about that, but I wouldn't take your time for that. But after a lot of failures, I decided that one thing we could do is organize the vaccination process. You know, vaccination was a very complicated process because you remember you had 3 types of vaccines. Some of them was well accepted. Some of them was more delicate to convince people to adopt this vaccine. You had to see which is going to be vaccinated. There was a lot of reluctance. Some population was really eager to be vaccinated, but some of it was really, you know, breaking and didn't want to be vaccinated. So you don't have to send the product to the population that don't want to be vaccinated because you would just waste it. So we're trying to optimize the vaccination campaign. And that has turned to be not so complicated because we had to define how many vaccinators, how many centers, and how many products, how much you need to buy those products. And we finally developed a tool. And when we presented this tool, that was during, you can see that it was during COVID, because you see 2 important people of, you know, Europe and Belgium, so Alexander De Croo and Ursula von der Leyen. Even the king came to see the tool. And the tool was working extraordinarily well. 5 people of the university, some people was working with Gianluca, some people were working with Tom Lennart, some people were working from VUB. Together, we developed an incredible cockpit to manage and organize the vaccination. And we proposed it to the COCOM even before the vaccination start. You know, we had a full cockpit because at COCOM they were using Excel file, and I saw the Excel file. I just, you know, how can you find your ways in this Excel file? You know, with a bunch of numbers, millions of numbers. You know, with the numbers of how much product they buy, how much people will attend the vaccination center, etc. It was incredible, you know, that they could work with that Excel file. So we came with a very nice interface, web thing. They didn't have to do a lot. We were able to predict who is going to be vaccinated in which city, or the numbers, because we made some correlation about, you know, the acceptance. And so we had an incredible tool. You know what? In order for COCOM to test it, they just had to do something. They had to download a Python executable framework. You know, had to download Python on their computers. They never wanted to do so, because they didn't know Python, you know, and say, okay, but if you use Excel, I think downloading a Python executable framework shouldn't be a problem. It's just 1 minute, you know, and then you just put Python, you modify perhaps some, and we can do it for you, you know, we can, if you have problem, we can download Python for you. They didn't want, you know, so they never used this tool. We spent month and month and month describing this tool. They never use it. And what is fancy, for instance, is in French. When they had the vaccination campaign, the most applied website for vaccination was developed by one guy who received the Légion d'honneur by Emmanuel Macron. Just to tell you, you know, that university academic can do incredible things. The guy here in his room, he built a website for taking appointment for vaccination center that was the most frequented by people in France. You know, he had 70% of the appointment of vaccination on his website, and he did it alone, you know. And you can, and Macron, in order to develop the vaccination campaign, paid to McKinsey, I think it was something like 10 million euros. By the way, in Brussels, same thing, you know. Who is taking charge of the algorithmic development in Brussels? Deloitte, and it's a scandal, you know. It's a scandal to see how much money is being expended with Deloitte company, competence, whatever, for doing vaccination, for doing mobility, and for doing it in the bad way they used to do it. So, so just to give you another example, I could give you many examples of that. 7 years ago, with a group of friends and a group of developers at the ULB, we were very much interested in mobility as a service, and we developed an app, which was a multimodality app. So you had to go from point A to point B. We developed it 7 years ago. Remember, that was 7 years ago. We developed it, and you could, you know, have a solution, take a bike, take a share car, use a bus. We were interacting with the STIB at the time because we wanted to have the data from the STIB in order to create this. We had data from the car sharing company. We had data from the bike sharing things. And so we create this app, and we show it to STIB and Brussels Mobility. And Innoviris was also financing us in part of that. And it was not perfect, because it was just a, you know, a student app, but we showed them to Steve, and they say, oh no, we're not interested. Brussels mobility, Brussels intermodality, doing intermodality in Brussels is a nonsense. You know, we're trying to convince the Steve people that was very useful to do. What they did is 5 years later, they did Floya. Perhaps you use it, perhaps you've done it. But Floya was just 5 years after us. 5 years after, so we lost 5 years, and it's not as good as what we did before, you know, and because they didn't have all. I could tell you so many stories about that, but just to give you the difficulty it is to interact. Not in that case, it's a kind of public company, STIB. They want to do it by themselves, you know, they want to do it alone, or I think they paid a lot of money to consultants, because I know some of the IT company, they do a lot of consultancy for STIB, and I can tell you that cost. That costs hugely, you know, to have those IT company. So often we disagree with Gianluca, and I'm happy to raise this disagreement here. I think that academic partner can do a lot of things, even do the last step. Gianluca is convinced that the last step, the implementation step, shouldn't be, you know, given to the university. I think we can go until there. Gianluca disagrees with me. We had that for many years, because this also a little bit define what FARI should be. According to me, FARI shouldn't be a research institute. As I told you before, we already have a lot of research institutes in Brussels doing AI, doing it fantastically. We're a very good place for doing research in AI. But this originality of FARI is to try to accompany, to push it until the last step, where you, Brussels citizen, you really see the impact of what Gianluca is doing in mobility, what we were doing in public health, etc. And it's not easy. The last step, the implementation step, is really what is really complicated. So, can give you another example. In Actiris, one of my researchers, 2 years working in Actiris to improve the job matching things between job offers and job demands. They have a system called Elise, works not badly, but it's not perfect. I had one of my researchers spending 2 years with them, developing in C#, because they wanted to have it in C#. He spent time with the IT people in Actiris, and after 2 years, they never implemented it. And I never succeed to understand why. You know, we did the best. You know, the guy was there with the IT team, and at the end of the day, they didn't want to implement it. You know, so you were speaking about, you know, educating the people, training the people, modifying the mindset of the public administration. I hope you can do that, you know, because I've never succeeded to modify any mindset. So the conclusion is really, you know, I've not shown you any techniques. I just tell you about my experience in trying to push FARI. So FARI has other road to pursue these days. You know, there is FARI Academy for training a lot of people, perhaps also training the public administration to, you know, adopt and to understand a bit more Python, for instance, in order to be able to download some kind of Python, or to, you know, understand what we're doing with, and I think FARI is a good place for mass matching it, but we haven't succeeded yet today, after I think 5 years of FARI existence, to have one of our software, even being held by Innoviris or whoever. We've never been able to have one of our software implemented and making a difference, making an impact for any Brussels inhabitants. And for me, it's a failure. For me, it's a strong failure. It's not the only place where those failures take place. I think all over the world, you see that there is a gap between the academic developers and the real thing, the real impact. I agree with you that we should imagine a triangle between the private sectors, the public sectors, and the academy. But this triangle has to be imagined, has to be focused on. It's not easy to see how far the academy should go in the development, how the private sectors will interact, because most of the time when you put the private sectors inside, like a Deloitte, they don't care about academy. They say, okay, now let us deal with the COVID. We are the expert. We don't need you. And I'm pretty sure that when Gianluca will come with his mobility solution, they will tell you, oh, we have a Deloitte, for instance, or we have someone who has the software for doing so. And so it's kind of frustration, because you work, like Gianluca is working in mobility in Brussels, you realize the good move things. It's incredible that they put good move without the kind of tool that Gianluca is proposing. But they did it. And it's incredible that we don't succeed to convince them to adopt what Gianluca is doing, and the same thing for public health, etc. So I still hope that we might change that. FARI is the first attempt to change that, and I hope you will accompany me. If you share my vision of FARI, perhaps you don't share it, but if you share it, please join us and try to push it forward. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. So, has anyone a question? Yeah.
Yes, I have a first question for you, Hugues.
Tell me.
And it's so the other day with Alessandro, we were selling at the evening where we showed the various different kind of teaching we have in our faculty, electromechanical engineering. And at a certain point, we were speaking with the students. At a certain point, we told them, for an engineer, then there is also the public sector. Sometimes there is the need of actual engineering experts in the ministry, in the various public bodies. Don't you think that this is probably part of the problem, the fact that we don't train our engineers to be actors in that kind of bodies, and probably there are not enough engineers where there are decisions that are engineering decisions to be made?
Yeah, you made a very good point. You're right. What I realize is that when I meet the people of in the public administration caring for the IT sectors, that they are not really open to innovation. They're not always very good. We have to say that, our best computer scientists, our best engineering computer science, they don't go to public administration for reasons that we can easily understand. They are inhibited in their attempt to do innovative thing. They don't receive a good salary. So there's no reason, for them to keep working on that. So you're right. Our best engineers, they're not going to public administration. So there's a lack of interlocutors that can really understand what we propose. And so this should change. So first you have the education things. You can try to convince them that in order to improve the world, public administration is another possibility, not only the private sectors, but the public administration. So you should accept to get there. And also from the other side, we should try to encourage the public administration or some public organism to pay them better, to compete, to propose them something sexy, which often is not what they propose for. So on both sides, there should be a change of mindset. Yeah, fully right.
Any other question?
So thank you, Hugues, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
It's very inspiring. So I have a question concerning what you define as algocracy, as an executive power.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by it? I'm curious. And how the GitHub that you mentioned can be considered a way to, anyway, democratize algocracy? I don't know.
It's two fundamental points. I guess, when I say that algorithm is modifying the executive power, is the fact that more and more we will have in our lives we'll have to follow, will be under the guidance, but more than the guidance, under the obligations of a lot of algorithms. Some example that I was giving to you was, for instance, Parcoursup. Parcoursup is an algorithm that decides about which university you should go. And before it was not like that. Before you were getting into a university, you were perhaps discussing with the rectors, you were trying to convince him. The things was really human-like, And the same thing in schools. I remember when I was a young dad, I've been in many schools trying to see which school was the best for my kids, and it's no more the case. Now you have to go to the inscription. So you see that there's a change in some important decision of our life, which are being taken by algorithms. And so this is why I imagine, remember also during COVID, there was an algorithm deciding if you could go in a restaurant or not, because if you didn't have the right algorithm, you couldn't even get into a restaurant or to a public place. So this is what I mean by the algorithm ruling our life more and more. No, because of that, and you're right, they just linked. One is to some extent entails the other aspect is because the executive power is being more and more, entrusted to algorithms. So who is in charge of writing these algorithms? So the private sector, definitely. I remember during the development of the COVID tracing things, Corona Alert, I discussed that with some of the people in charge of that. In fact, it was one of my colleagues developing it. And they all decided that Google and Apple had the solution. You remember that? That was a kind of a Bluetooth thing, and it was Google and Apple. We could have done something much better at certain local scales. Discussing with the people, I was proposing, because I think you mentioned it during your talk, or I don't know who mentioned it, but there is a kind of defiance of people because they don't know who is developing it. People didn't even download the Corona Alert because they thought, wow, it's again a Google and Apple things. Who is going to manage the data? What's going to happen with our data? And when I discuss with the private people, the law people, like I think in Namur or in Liège, there's Elise de Grave. There are a lot of people working on that, saying that people don't trust anymore those private companies, these GAFAM things. You can imagine in the States what's happening now. So I believe that we have to modify the way this first, you could decide not to adopt those algorithms to ruling our life, but this is, I think, it's a lost battle. I think the algorithm, for reason of efficiency, the algorithm will take more and more room, more and more place in our daily life. So this is something we need to accept. But once you accept that, who is going to develop the algorithm? And this is where I think that the citizen, simple citizen, even taken randomly, or should play a role in understanding those algorithms and taking part to some extent. This is what I use. This is why I call it the social GitHub. Because computer scientists, millions of computer scientists daily, they work together in trying to build interesting code. This is GitHub. So why not, having also citizens, even if they don't understand coding, I think we can still be part of this exercise. They could easily understand what is underlying the décret inscription. You don't need to be a Java or Python expert in order to understand the matching algorithm that make your kid accessing a school. There are some criteria, and those criteria, in fact, Jean-Luc, I was also discussing the criteria for mobility things. I think those criteria shouldn't be discussed by anyone else than the citizen themselves, because at the end of the day, this is the citizen that will be impacted by those criteria. So I guess the criteria should be discussed in a kind of democratic way by the people themselves, the one that will be subject to those algorithms. So this is how I do connect algocracy and city coding, citizen coding. Please.
Do you think that the way that we can nowadays really easily code with AI, that can disrupt these things, because citizens can code themselves.
Yeah, you're right.
And help with AI.
Indeed.
It become easier and easier, every day easier with agents.
It's an excellent point. But I don't think it disrupts. I think it encourages citizens to be part of this exercise, because these days it's easier for citizens to code than it used to be. To some extent they could say, okay, what happened if I decided to rather use this criteria than the other one? And then as you say, the whatever Copilot or ChatGPT will change the code in order to, implement this citizen reflection, and you'll have the impacts right away. You could see what happened if you have a good simulator. You could see what happened if, for instance, décret inscription, for instance. You need to imagine that the décret inscription first was in order to mix the population in school. And the first criteria that they put in the décret inscription is the locality, where you live. And that is completely stupid, you know, because people don't live in the same district. So there's the segregation of district in Brussels, which is being repercuted in the segregation in school. They could have, you know, managed that. They could have played with that by having a good simulator and see what would happen if you do that and that. And you're right, AI can help citizens to take part in this coding proper. Sure. Yeah, good point, very good point.
Thank you for your talk. More of a curiosity. In the beginning, you were mentioning that you try to like convince the balloon educational system to modify that.
The transcription.
Yeah, but why do you think you failed? You failed in doing that? Is it like mostly for political reasons, in the sense that the way it works now, it guarantees like some kind of social status quo that doesn't change, so there's less social mobility? I don't know, like. Or is it more economic?
I do think that this, you know, whenever Brussels pretend, or perhaps Wallonia or some other place in the world, to pretend to be a participatory democracy, you've really few experience of participatory democracy, even without speaking about algorithm and software. Just that participatory democracy, you know, there's many examples of participatory democracy that just fail. You know, they were organized, like you may know the example in France of the l'Assemblée citoyenne pour le climat, where those people decided about a lot of very, very, very strong things, and none of them, or very few of them, was followed up by the politician afterwards. So I think this participatory democracy is still a very kind of a dream things. So, and when you put software on that, you know, saying participatory democracy for developing software, that is incredible, because you try to merge two things which seems to be totally incompatible, you know, because citizens cannot code. So why should involve citizens in the coding process? Let the coding to the private sector. They are the good one coding. Not even mentioning the academy, because for them, academy, they just dreamer, you know, on the ivory tower. So they not even try to interact with them. So let's the real coders, so the private sectors, GAFAM, Google, etc. So as you see, those two ideas of participatory democracy and citizen coding is so far away from the way the politicians, you know, think that should be. That I guess this is just a cultural thing. It's not an economical thing, because often we're much cheaper than we even do it for free. I can tell you that the 5 students working for the vaccination cockpit, they did it for free, and they spent a month and month because they were happy to, you know, help the vaccination process to be unfolded in Brussels, so they did it for free. COCOM didn't have to spend €1. They spend millions of euros for Deloitte, but at least for us, they didn't have to spend €1. So it's cultural things, you know, real cultural things. And perhaps our friends here might change the cultural mindset of this public administration to try new things. Yeah, it's a long journey. Very good point too. Very good point too. Yeah. And also, Gianluca has some explanation to that, because we discussed that so many times. That Gianluca would in general say that they better trust this software consultant company, because if they have any problem, you know, they can just you know, go back and project the responsibility of those people. It's much harder with academy, where we don't stay, the students don't stay, and, you know, have a following up, the maintenance. It's not only lobbying, they might have some kind of objective reasons to privilege the private sectors instead of the academy. I've lived that all my life, you know, even at the ULB, the hand of Microsoft on I've tried to fight that for 10 years, I had to give up, you know. Even if I knew that here at the ULB, we had a lot of incredible coders that could make a lot of tools, and they never wanted, because if they had any problem, you know, at least Microsoft is there in order to help. If you pay, I don't know, €10,000 a day.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.